Okay guys, so this is our part two of our GVM marketing versus reality section, discussing wheels and tires. In the previous one we talked about axle loading, etc. So there's no point having a high axle load and not having a wheel and tire appropriate to that axle load. So a good example of that is someone that says, hey, I'm giving you a 3,000 kilo rear axle load, but they're allowing you to put on a wheel that only rated to 1250 or 1400 or whatever the case. The wheel and tire package has to match that axle load ability given to you by the consumer or by the company giving you the GVM. So you can't, if it's a 3,000 kilo axle load capacity and that's what they're giving you as actually a physically usable GVM, it's 1,500 kilos. So it's two wheels, 1,500 kilos each equals 3 ton. If they're only saying to you, you've only got to reach 2,400 kilos, then you only need 1,200 kilos for each rim. That's the standard. Tires the same. So you need to ensure that your axle load that they're giving you and your wheel and tires match. If it doesn't, then you've got to call into question what's the company selling me or what am I getting? Because if they're giving you 3,150 or 3.5 ton or whatever the hell it is, if they're giving you that and they're saying, oh, but you can put a 1,200 kilo wheel on it, you can pretty much call it out as rubbish. It doesn't work. So example, on our 6x6 3 ton axle load, minimum load rating 1,500 kilos. Now, example on the other side of it, on some of our 79 packages, we give a 2,850 kilo rear axle rating. Even though the diff is rated at 3 ton, the rear axle load on the GVM specific would be 2,850. And people will go, well, I'm losing a bit of axle load capacity. No, you're not. And we'll get back to practical loading on that subject, but the reality of it is, if you go too high in your rear axle load rating and say, oh, I've got to have 1,500, I can't have 1,450, most all-terrain tires on the market only meet 1,450 kilo rated. So that means that you're going to have to find a mud terrain or an RT or whatever. So, but you only need enough axle load to accomplish the GVM that you're getting. And so wheels and tires are a critical component. Now, re-rating of wheels. So the manufacturer states that if it's not written or stamped on the wheel, what an engineer will do, he will say, right, this particular wheel's off a GXL Land Cruiser, there's no load rating on it, there's no load rating stated from Toyota. So the vehicle that it's provided on has a 2,300 kilo rear axle load maximum, hence the wheel on this would be half of that. So that would be an assumption by an engineer, assuming that the maximum axle load is the maximum, or the maximum wheel rating is the maximum axle load on the vehicle it was provided on. Now, some companies under the federal space will say, well, we've done engineering and testing and certification to say that that wheel's suitable. The question is, the manufacturer of the wheel, if they believed it was rated to do higher than that, surely they would rate it that way. The manufacturers like your Toyotas and your Nissans and your Dodge, all those guys, they have safety margins built into their products. So what essentially you're doing by re-rating a wheel is you're eating into safety margin. So under a lot of the state legislation, there's a clear definition in there about re-rating of wheels in there, unless the first stage manufacturer specifies that under Australian conditions he will accept a higher rating, then happy days. However, federal approval, sometimes it's, well, as a company we're taking that responsibility and we've done our own independent tests. So that's a whole different discussion for everything, but at the end of the day, if you understand why a load rated wheel and tire is needed and what you're getting versus axle load, GVM, etc., you can do your own math and work out, is what I'm getting really what I'm being sold, or is it not what I'm being sold, or does it suit my need? And that's what this whole video is about. The other one is, if you get a GVM from an SSM provider, and GVMs are allowed to go higher via an SSM. So it's a federally approved kit. Post-rego, the states go, if you've got an SSM, with all the engineering, we'll often let that go. The axle and wheel rating things is a bit of a grey area still, and they're trying to rectify that and clarify that. However, a lot of states in Queensland as a good example, you cannot re-rate an axle. That's it. There is no grey area. You can't get around that space. So post-rego, the states are sticking their hand up and saying, in our state, you need to abide by the ADRs that of our state. So hence we all have the same ADRs, but everyone has they have their little ins and outs on, different parts of that, what they, criteria of what they'll accept and what they don't. The other one is whenever you get a GVM, it doesn't matter who it's, let's say it's ARB, it's Lovells, it's JMax, it's whoever, right? The wheel and tyre package that's stated on the RVD, and everybody can go to the RVCS website and actually research the RVD of what the second stage manufacturer has submitted to the federal government as an approval. Under state legislation, you can take a four-wheel drive in a NA NB1 class, and you can increase its tyre diameter by 50 millimeters or 7% in some states. However, when you have a federally approved GVM, they've allowed you to step outside of the standard scheme. You cannot just automatically apply the 50 mil rule. So if your approval says that you can only run a 285, 75, 16, you're only allowed to go within 2% of that wheel size. So the brake testing, the dynamic testing, the load testing is all done on that size tyre. So you don't have that 50 mil tolerance. So if he says, oh, you can put a 285, no, you can't go up to a 315 or a 35 or whatever, because that SSM is very, very specific. So have a look at your RVD. Everyone can access it. It's public information. What wheel is the tested wheel for my GVM? And that's what it is. So potentially, if you had an accident and you're running a larger tyre on your car with a GVM upgrade, you could potentially be refused insurance because the brake test was never done on that size tyre. So the bigger the tyre, the more rolling mass, they're the issues that you have. So you must maintain your GVM to that specified outcome. You can't mix and match. And we see guys going, oh, well, I've got a GVM and I can run a 35, it means I can run a 37, or I get a GVM with a 4-inch lift, that means I can run 6 inches of lift. No, you must stay within the SSM approval. The SSM approval has allowed you to step outside the box and have a specific approval, but that is very, very specific. So there's no 50 mil tolerance outside of that SSM. So, all right, that'll give you some information on wheels and tyres. Stay tuned for our next part on GVM's reality versus marketing.